There's no slun show miller of mates and then when not either snainers did. We struck knives go in the steam a wee. Snarfit grab my go out no. Helps the meteor starker with the head no. And the last flusser some archbishop or nerves are set ass in the beat. There's no not an area wall. Her alarm sluff for me and Sab but those bets here at the Tharber her air from the corporate so we're the merhop. Mash salad the whiff is in on you. He'll after the mergahish. Her sims no gillers so no one sally reach it gate rossamy and I just said that they found it. Send us the weave a house or what. Her the merhn of eating it. Slasman on my so snil besser. Her head the liller breath off better. Here I used to now work all on in the derp, but the wish off the ziki bringing nesser with. Smears her and it wheel bit ziki bringing nesser with. Thirst the enemy end up. Her street for that burf flower bring oxish. Sir being the lost it. Sar and the feeler the whoop. Sir ich drove out the one. Now heaps bad sweet for the seal mafer. Her has no bluff no more at the bing thunder. Schnarrow axe at this near nothing in feet. Nay, her and a guy by no warm saying what the were malv when she had sub beside that it's a me and Naima clutched her small boarding pass, as if it was the only thing tying her to this strange new world she was stepping into. The airport was noisy, full of people hugging, laughing, and taking pictures before their flights. Around her, families spoke of holidays and business trips, but Naima stood alone, with no one to wave her goodbye. When she finally walked into the plane, her heart raced. The seats looked too big for her, the people around her looked too confident, and she felt like a stranger in her own skin. She sat by the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass as the plane began to move. Children laughed and couples whispered about the adventures waiting for them. Naima, however, was not flying toward joy. She was being sent into a life of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and sleeping in corners no one cared about. The thought made her chest heavy. She imagined herself bent over someone else's sink, cooking food she would never eat, cleaning rooms she could never call her own. As the plane rose above the clouds, tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried to hide them, afraid of looking weak, but her heart was breaking. She thought of her mother's eyes that had followed her silently at the station, full of love but powerless to protect her. That memory was all she carried for comfort. Naima whispered softly to herself, "This is not the end of me. This is only the beginning. One day, I will tell this story not as a maid, but as someone who rose from the ground they tried to bury me in." Would you like me to continue with part 3? The harsh reality abroad, around 350 to 400 words. In the same style, when Naima arrived in Elmira City, she thought for a moment she had stepped into a dream. The mansion where she was taken looked like something from a storybook. Tall white walls, shining windows, gardens filled with roses. But that dream broke quickly. The beauty was not for her. She was shown not a bedroom, not even a small space of her own, but a thin mat in the corner of the kitchen where the smell of smoke and soap never left. That was to be her room. From the first day, her hands never rested. She woke before sunrise to prepare breakfast she would never taste, scrubbed marble floors until her knees hurt, and polished silver plates that were too heavy for her tired arms. The lady of the house shouted at her for every mistake. "You are too slow. Did you wipe this table properly?" The words cut deeper than the work itself. Even the children laughed at her accent and called her the kitchen girl. At night, when everyone else slept in soft beds, Naima curled up on her mat, her body aching. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the refrigerator humming, and felt like the house itself was mocking her. She had come thousands of miles, not for opportunity, but for slavery in disguise. She wanted to scream, but no one would listen. She wanted to run, but she had nowhere to go. Still deep inside, a fire refused to die. Every insult, every cruel command, every long day only added fuel to it. Naima whispered to herself in the dark, "This is not forever. I was not born just to clean someone's dirt. One day my hands will build something greater." And with that quiet promise, she forced herself to sleep, ready to face another endless day. Do you want me to now expand part 4, Silent Tears in the Night, about 300 to 350 words, in the same powerful emotional tone? When the house finally grew silent at night, when the lights were turned off and the family went to sleep in their soft, warm beds, Naima lay on her thin mat in the kitchen. The smell of soap, onions, and smoke surrounded her, but what hurt most was the emptiness in her heart. She would close her eyes and suddenly remember the sound of her mother's voice calling her name back in Lamora. She would remember the nights she used to sleep beside her mother, safe in her arms, listening to the crickets outside. Those memories were the only blanket she had in that cold kitchen. Some nights the loneliness became too heavy to carry. Silent tears rolled down her face, soaking her pillow, though she made sure not to let a single sob escape her lips. She was afraid even her crying would be used against her. In the darkness, she whispered her pain into the air, as if her mother could hear her across the miles. "Mama, I miss you. Mama, I wish you were here." But after her tears, something else always came. A quiet determination. Naima wiped her face and sat up, whispering words she wanted the walls to hear. "I will not remain a maid forever. This is not the end of me. One day I will rise." She repeated it again and again until the words became stronger than her sorrow. The next morning, when the mistress of the house shouted or the children laughed at her, Naima no longer only felt pain. She carried that secret promise inside her chest like a hidden weapon. Each insult reminded her that she had a destiny beyond this mansion, beyond the endless scrubbing and cooking. She began to believe her tears were watering the seeds of her future. She didn't know when or how, but she knew her day would come. Would you like me to move on to part 5? The Kind Stranger, around 350 to 400 words. In the same deeply emotional and viral tone? One evening, Naima was sent to the market to buy groceries for the family. It was one of the few times she was allowed to step outside the mansion walls, and she always cherished those brief moments of freedom. The streets of Elmira City were alive, vendors calling out prices, children laughing, and the smell of roasted corn floating in the air. Naima moved quickly, carrying her basket, her eyes lowered as always, afraid of drawing attention. But that day fate had other plans. As she struggled to balance the heavy bags, a man stopped to help her. He was tall, dressed neatly, with kind eyes that didn't look down on her the way others did. "Careful," he said gently, lifting one of the bags with ease. "You'll hurt yourself carrying all this alone." Naima was startled. She wasn't used to kindness. She thanked him softly, expecting him to walk away, but instead he asked, "You speak so well. Why are you working as a maid?" For a moment Naima froze. No one had ever cared to ask her story, and without meaning to, she spoke honestly. She told him she had been sent from Lamora by her family, how she worked day and night, and how she dreamed of something more. She thought he might laugh or pity her, but instead, his eyes grew thoughtful. That man was Dr. Kalen, a respected businessman known for his generosity. Something about Naima's words, the way she carried both pain and dignity, struck him deeply. "You are not meant to stay where you are," he said firmly. "I can see it in your eyes. You have more inside you than they will ever understand." Naima's heart trembled at his words. For the first time, someone saw her not as a servant, not as a burden, but as a person with potential. She walked back to the mansion that night with the same heavy bags, but her steps felt lighter. A small spark of hope had been lit, and she knew her life was about to change. Do you want me to continue with part 6? The opportunity, around 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional, viral tone? Dr. Kalen did not forget Naima after that day. He saw something rare in her eyes, a hunger for more, a quiet fire that hardship had not managed to kill. A week later, he returned to the same market and found her again. This time he spoke with certainty. "Naima, if you truly want to change your life, I will help you. But you must promise me you will never give up." Naima's hands trembled as she nodded. It felt almost unreal that a stranger would believe in her when even her own family had not. Without telling her employers, Dr. Kalen arranged for her to attend night school. He paid her fees in secret and gave her books to study. During the day, Naima still scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and faced insults. But at night, when the mansion slept, she slipped quietly out to the small classroom lit with flickering bulbs. There, with tired eyes and aching hands, she learned to write essays, solve problems, and speak new languages. The hours were long, and the exhaustion was heavy, but Naima refused to stop. She told herself, "These books are my escape. Every page I finish takes me one step closer to freedom." Slowly, the broken girl who once cried on a kitchen mat began to change. Her teachers noticed her discipline. Her classmates admired her determination. Even when she struggled, Naima smiled because at last she was working for her own future, not just cleaning someone else's. Years of silent pain were now turning into strength. Each night she studied. She built herself brick by brick into a woman with vision and courage. Naima realized she was no longer just surviving. She was preparing to rise. And in the quiet of her heart, she promised herself, "The world will one day see who I truly am." Shall I continue with part 7? The years of hard work, around 350 to 400 words. In the same heartfelt, viral storytelling style? 8 years passed, and Naima's life had completely changed. The girl who once wiped floors until her hands bled was now a woman full of knowledge, confidence, and determination. Night after night, she carried her books home, her arms aching and her eyes heavy, studying long after the mansion had gone quiet. She learned languages, mastered business skills, and earned diplomas that opened doors she had only dreamed of. Every lesson, every late night, every struggle built her into someone unstoppable. When Dr. Kalen offered her a position in his company, Naima felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had always been a maid, unseen and unheard, and now she was stepping into a world of offices, meetings, and decisions. But she carried with her the same determination that had helped her survive in the kitchen. She worked harder than anyone else, learning quickly, solving problems, and proving that she belonged. Her dedication did not go unnoticed. Promotion after promotion followed. From assistant to manager, and soon to director, Naima became one of the youngest leaders in the company. She spoke with authority in meetings, made smart decisions, and earned the respect of colleagues who had doubted her at first. Even the challenges that once would have crushed her now became stepping stones to success. And though her life was filled with luxury and recognition, Naima never forgot where she came from. She remembered the nights she cried alone in the kitchen, the cold looks of her family, and the fear she had carried across continents. Those memories were not a burden. They were proof of her strength. Each time she remembered them, she felt pride in how far she had come. Naima had transformed her pain into power, her loneliness into learning, and her struggles into achievement. The girl who had been sent away in shame had risen, and her story was becoming an inspiration not only to herself but to anyone who ever felt overlooked, abandoned, or underestimated. Even with all her success, Naima's heart often traveled back to Lamora. Late at night, after busy days filled with meetings and decisions, she would sit by her window and remember the evening she had been sent away. She could still see her stepfather's cold face, her siblings' careless whispers, and her mother's trembling hands as she clung to her for the last time. Those memories never left her, no matter how many diplomas hung on her wall, or how many titles she earned at work. Naima had built a life that once seemed impossible. She had money, respect, and a future brighter than she ever imagined. Yet something inside her whispered that her journey was not complete. She had left Lamora as a girl who carried shame and rejection on her shoulders. If she ever returned, she wanted to walk back not as the weak girl they pushed away, but as the strong woman she had become. One evening, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her wore confidence in her eyes and dignity in her posture. She smiled softly and said to herself, "It's time." With that, Naima made her decision. She would return to Lamora, not to prove them wrong with anger, but to show them the strength they once refused to see. She began preparing her journey, not with a small bag and heavy heart like before, but with pride and calm power. This time she wasn't leaving for survival. She was returning for closure. In her heart, she knew her homecoming would not only change her family's view of her, but it would also light a fire of hope for every girl who had ever been told she was nothing. Shall I continue with part 9? The arrival at Lamora, around 350 words, in the same emotional and viral style? The day Naima returned to Lamora was unlike the day she had left. This time, the road that once carried her away in silence now carried her back in glory. A sleek black car rolled slowly into the village, its polished surface shining under the sun. Children stopped their games and ran after it, shouting in excitement. Elders came out of their homes, shading their eyes with their hands, wondering who such an important guest could be. When the door opened, silence fell. Naima stepped out gracefully, dressed in a flowing African gown stitched with golden embroidery that shimmered with every movement. Her head was wrapped in a crown like geli, and her jewelry sparkled in the light. She stood tall, her posture firm, her smile calm yet powerful. The villagers gasped. Was this truly the same Naima who had once left with only a worn-out bag and downcast eyes? Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Is that Naima? It cannot be. Look at her, she shines like a queen. The same people who once turned their backs on her now stared in awe, unable to believe what their eyes were seeing. Naima did not need to announce her success. Her presence alone spoke louder than words. As she walked through the familiar dusty path, her heels clicking softly against the ground, Naima felt a rush of emotions. The air smelled the same, the trees stood where they always had, but she was no longer the same girl who had left. She was stronger, wiser, and radiant with dignity. Her heart whispered, "This is the homecoming I once cried for." Her return was not marked by shame but by respect. Every pair of eyes followed her. Every breath held in awe. Naima had come back, not broken and forgotten, but shining with a light that made the entire village bow to her presence. Shall I move forward with part 10? The shock of her family, around 350 words, in the same powerful emotional tone? Naima's steps carried her straight toward the house where her family lived, the same door she once walked out of, carrying a small bag and heavy heart, now open to receive her in silence. Her family had heard the whispers in the village, but they never imagined the truth until they saw her with their own eyes. Her brother was the first to speak, his voice shaking. "Naima," he whispered, almost afraid to believe it. The woman standing before him looked nothing like the girl they once pushed away. Her skin glowed, her dress shimmered, and her eyes held a confidence that made him lower his gaze. Her siblings who once mocked her stood frozen, their mouths open in disbelief. Even her stepfather, the man who had dismissed her as nothing, could not find his words. Her mother, however, could not stop the tears that rushed down her cheeks. She pressed her trembling hands to her mouth as she stared at her daughter, trying to take in the miracle before her. For years she had prayed silently, fearing she would never see Naima again. Now here she was, not broken, not beaten, but standing tall and radiant. Naima looked around the room slowly, her calm gaze making their shame grow heavier. No one dared to ask questions, but their expressions spoke for them. How had she gone from a servant girl to this powerful woman? And what had she brought back with her? Then their eyes caught sight of the luxury car parked outside, the gifts her driver was unloading, and the elegance in every movement Naima made. The truth hit them hard. She had not returned empty-handed, and she had not returned as the burden they once cast away. She had come back with success, dignity, and power that none of them could deny. Would you like me to continue with part 11? The confrontation, around 350 words. In the same emotional, viral style? Naima stood in the living room, her posture straight and calm, as her stepfather approached with a forced smile. "We always prayed for your success," he said, his voice shaky but trying to sound confident. The words sounded hollow even to him, and Naima knew it. She remembered the night she had cried on that thin mat in the kitchen, the harsh words he had thrown at her, and the cold push that sent her onto a plane with nothing but a small bag. Every insult, every moment of rejection, was etched into her memory. Her stepfather's smile faltered as Naima's steady gaze met his. There was no anger, no rage, only quiet strength. "You prayed for my success?" she asked softly, her voice calm but cutting. "Do you remember the nights I cried while you ignored me? The words you said, the way you looked at me like I was nothing?" He opened his mouth but no sound came out. The shame in his eyes grew heavier with each word she didn't even need to say. Naima continued, letting her silence speak louder than any accusation could. She didn't yell or scream, she didn't need to. Her presence, her confidence, and the life she had built for herself said more than words ever could. Her siblings shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor, realizing for the first time the depth of their own neglect. Her mother's tears flowed freely now, and even the walls seemed to echo with memories of what had once been. A family that had turned their back on her, thinking she was weak. Naima's eyes softened for a moment as she looked at them, but her voice remained firm. "I am here now. Not to fight, not to beg for love, but to show you what strength looks like. You may have tried to break me, but I rose anyway." Her stepfather could only swallow hard, trapped by his own guilt. Naima had faced him without anger, yet every word, every glance reminded him of the cruelty he had shown. She had come back, not to be the girl they abandoned, but to be the woman they could never ignore. "Shall I continue?" Naima took a deep breath, letting the tension in the room settle around her. She could feel the weight of years, the rejection, the loneliness, the endless nights of silent tears. For a moment anger flickered inside her, a reminder of all the pain her family had caused. But she pushed it aside. She had worked too hard, overcome too much, to let anger define this moment. Instead, she chose dignity and she chose power. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small polished key. She handed it to her mother, whose hands shook as they accepted it. "This is for you," Naima said softly, her voice steady. "A new home. A place where you are loved, where you are safe, and where you will never have to suffer alone." Her mother's eyes widened, and tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking the dust on her face. She looked at her daughter, seeing not the child she once scolded or sent away, but a woman who had taken her pain and turned it into something beautiful. She opened her mouth to speak, but only sobs came out. Naima knelt and hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her mother's tears on her shoulder. The other family members watched in silence, realizing that Naima's strength was not just in her success, but in her ability to forgive while holding on to her dignity. She had not come back to punish them. She had come back to show them that true power lies in rising above cruelty, in transforming hurt into hope. The house key was more than a key to a home. It was a symbol of everything Naima had become. She had endured hardship, learned, grown, and now she was giving back. Not revenge but love tempered with the strength of someone who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. Her mother clung to the key as if it were a lifeline, and for the first time in years, Naima felt the warmth of family, a warmth she had fought so hard to reclaim. Not through anger, but through the quiet, unshakable power of her own heart. Shall I continue with part 13? The villa. Word of Naima's return spread through Lamora like wildfire. By the next morning, the dusty streets that had once seemed so small and confining were alive with excitement. Neighbors poured out of their homes, children running ahead, waving their arms and calling her name. "Naima! Naima the brave!" they shouted, their voices echoing across the village. People who had once ignored her now lined the streets, their eyes wide with wonder at the woman who had transformed her life. Vendors stopped their carts, and even the elders who had witnessed her departure years ago came forward, leaning on canes, shaking their heads in disbelief. The girl they had thought weak, the girl they had dismissed, had returned with dignity, strength, and success that could not be ignored. Songs were sung in her honor, drums beat in celebration, and colorful cloths fluttered from balconies and windows. It was as if the entire village had awakened to cheer for the victory of someone they had once underestimated. Children ran to her, their small hands reaching for hers, eyes sparkling with admiration. "Tell us your story," they begged. Naima smiled, kneeling to greet them, feeling the joy of being celebrated not for wealth alone, but for courage, resilience, and the power to rise above pain. She whispered to them, "No matter what anyone says, never let anyone tell you that you are less than you are. Be brave, work hard, and your time will come." Even the villagers who had once whispered doubts about her journey now clapped and cheered, inspired by her example. Naima moved through the crowd with calm confidence, acknowledging each person with a nod, a smile, or a gentle word. She had come back not just for herself, but as a symbol of hope, a living proof that no hardship could define a person's destiny. Lamora, once a village that had seen her leave in silence, now celebrated her return with music, laughter, and tears. Naima the Brave was no longer just a girl from the village. She was a legend. Naima's family watched the village celebration from the doorway, their faces pale and full of shame. The same people who had laughed at her, ignored her, and whispered that she would never amount to anything now stood trembling, realizing the truth before their eyes. Her stepfather's shoulders sagged, her siblings looked down at the ground, and even distant relatives who had once mocked her approached cautiously, unsure how to face the woman they had wronged. We are so sorry, Naima," her stepfather stammered, his voice small and hollow. "We never realized we were wrong." Her siblings mumbled their apologies, eyes glistening with guilt. They spoke of their shame, of the nights they had laughed when they should have helped, of the mistakes they had made. Naima listened quietly, her expression calm, her gaze steady. She could feel the years of anger rising like a storm, but she held it back. She had learned that true power was not in revenge, but in dignity. Slowly, she raised her hand, and with a voice soft but commanding she said, "I forgive you, but I will never forget." The words hung in the air like a quiet thunderclap. They were not angry words, not bitter ones, but filled with the weight of experience, strength, and self-respect. Her family felt it immediately. This was a forgiveness that demanded acknowledgement, a strength that could not be bought or ignored. Tears streamed down her mother's face as she realized that her daughter had grown into a woman who could rise above hurt, who could turn pain into power. Even her stepfather bowed his head, understanding for the first time that Na'ima's greatness was not measured by wealth or status, but by the courage and resilience she carried in her heart. Na'ima turned away gently, letting them absorb the lesson. She had faced her past without rage, and in doing so, she had given them the hardest truth they would ever learn, that those who are pushed down can rise higher than anyone ever imagined and forgiven. Na'ima's story spread far beyond the dusty streets of Lamora. People told it around fires in marketplaces, and in homes where children listened wide-eyed, learning a lesson that would stay with them forever. She was no longer just a girl who had been sent away to work as a maid. She had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the power to rise above every insult, every hardship, and every doubt. Villagers would point to her and say, "See her? That is Na'ima the brave. Never underestimate the one you push away." Her journey reminded everyone that life could be cruel, but resilience could turn even the deepest pain into strength and glory. Mothers told their daughters, "No matter what anyone says, or how hard life seems, you can rise. Never let anyone make you feel small." Even those who had once doubted her, the relatives who mocked, the neighbors who whispered, learned to respect her. They realized that greatness cannot be measured by money or power alone. It is measured by the courage to endure, to grow, and to forgive. Na'ima's name became legend. She walked through Lamora with her head held high, not for pride, but as a living example that life could be rewritten with determination, patience, and heart. She had transformed her suffering into a story that inspired not just her village, but everyone who heard it. The girl they once dismissed had returned as a queen, not of a throne but of spirit. Her life proved one unshakable truth: pain does not define you, resilience does, and those who rise from the ashes can shine brighter than anyone ever imagined. If you want, I can compile all 15 parts into one polished, continuous 4,000-word script ready for viral storytelling with smooth transitions and extra emotional beats. Do you want me to do that next?